The title, there we go. Title of my sermon today is, Are you prepared to flee? Are you prepared to flee? It's interesting because the word flee in the Bible, especially the New Testament, where it's actually used 31 times, the translation of the word is fugo. Fugo. P-H-E-U-G-O. And fugo in the Greek means to hurry up, to haste, to escape danger, or, I did not realize this, it also means shun, to shun. Now, one of those instances where fleeing, or to flee, that you all know, is Matthew 24 and verse 16. Where Christ is talking, the Olivet prophecy, and he talks about in the end times, is said to flee to the where? Mountains. He tells them, you need to flee to the mountains. Because of what's going to go on, what's happening at that time. Even you have people in the church have this special. We're going to flee to the place of safety. And they get all excited about that, or they wonder where it might be. And if Carlos is going to be there or not. So, that is a type of fleeing. As we also just heard, and you read during this past week, that the children of Israel fled Egypt. Well, that's not what I'm going to talk about today. Because I want to talk and take you to a story. If you will join me in Genesis. Let's go back to Genesis. Another story in 39. We all know the story of Joseph and how he was sold by his brothers, Midian traders, and then they took him to Egypt and they sold him to a man named Potiphar. Everybody know that story? I find it interesting, as Brian says, there's so many things going through the scriptures that no matter how many times I read them, I pull something out, and I just realized that every time they mentioned his name, they kept saying, the Egyptian. The Egyptian. But he was a very powerful man. One of the top men in the entire country. He was over the palace guard, supposedly. He was even said commander of the armies. He was top notch. Well, he decided, hey, I like this guy. He's got potential. So they sold Joseph at 17 years of age. How old are you, Adam? How old? 7. 10 more years you could be sold. Okay? If you were Joseph. Don't want to scare you. And so you can imagine that happening in your life. And so Potiphar brought him back to the house, and next thing you know, we don't know whether it's a year or 2 years, but he put him over things, and next thing you know, this kid was sharper than any of the others. He raised him up, so he gave him control of everything. So let's go to that story now in Genesis 39, and let's pick it up in verse 6. It said, so he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate, which means he didn't even have to think. Wouldn't you like somebody like that? You don't even have to think. They just take care of everything, and they put the bread before you. And that's why I thought I got married, but I digress. Let's go back to the Joseph story. Okay? For my wife, I have to ride with her 2 hours. Okay. And so he did not want you. And then it says, and Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, which means he was a good-looking dude. He looked good, and in form, he was, oh, yeah. he walked in the room, half the women would go like, wow, it's a good-looking man. Not that there was anything wrong with that, but you could see how he made an impression. But do you remember those same words were used about his mother, wasn't it? That's why Jacob, he liked that form and appearance. Okay. So let's go to verse 7. Now it came to pass after these things that his master's wife, Potiphar's wife, we never knew her name, cast longing eyes on Joseph. Okay, my wife has never, I know, cast longing eyes. I don't know, maybe before we got married. But what does that mean? Longing eyes. Does that mean you're like... Any of you women want to come up and demonstrate? No. Good, I don't want to get in trouble. Because if you did, I sure wasn't going to ask Mary to do it. She'd be in trouble. But longing is, okay, let's just say she looked long at him. She was attracted to him. And you have to realize at that time in Egypt, you go with history, so neither male or female wore a lot of clothes. It was minimal. So she was able to see all of his form and appearance. And it's interesting because he would have too seen hers. And being she married one of the top men there, he probably had his choice. Beautiful women. So she was not, I don't want to use that word. She was attractive, I'm sure. And so it wasn't something like he would have been repulsed by her. But let's go and read the rest of the story. So she cast longing eyes on Joseph and she said, lie with me. Not subtle. She was pretty bold. Go to bed with me. Sex with me. I mean, that's what she was looking at. Then in verse 8, but he refused and said to his master's wife, I like how this is put together. Excuse me. Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept anything back from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this wickedness and sin against God? He knew it was a sin. Commandments obviously existed, didn't they? Handed down from Abraham from Genesis 25, since he knew them. And so here he was, none of his family around. He's a single guy, good looking. Woman's coming on to him, more than coming on to him. And he says, look, I'm not doing this. Great character. So verse 10. So it was as she spoke to Joseph, get this one, day by day. Now it says do not add or take away, but I'm taking license. Day by day by day by day. She wanted him. And she probably was not used to no. It's good for our young people here to remember the word no. Get used to it. It's a lot better when you get older. So, she spoke to Joseph day by day that he did not heed her to lie with her or to even be with her. Which means he made sure he was not where she was if he could avoid it. Because he could say, I got things to do. Busy. But it happened in verse 11, about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside. So none of the other servants. Coincidence? Things that make you go, Verse 12. She caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. Fled. As you see, verse 13, fled. Verse 15, fled. So what about you? Were you confronted with sin this week? And did you flee? Did you flee? He had to flee to avoid sin. Got him thrown in prison, but it all turned out well because he was able to say no. But he was also able to flee. So this week, did you realize or understand some of your triggers? Your triggers for sin. That's what that little piece of bread was partly about. Is it reminded you of the sin you want to put out of your life, that flat. And there are certain triggers that we have to look at and recognize. And so as we leave these days of unleavened bread 2025 behind us, I want us to think about the triggers. I want us to think about fleeing sin. And are you prepared to flee? Because the triggers, because here he was, 18, 19-year-old guy. When he walked in the room, everybody would look at him, an impressive guy. And so all of a sudden, here, this probably very nice-looking woman. Okay. He's a young guy. He has feelings. Feelings he had to suppress because it was not right. So, where did he do this? But up here, in his mind. In his mind, he said, no, this is not right. I'm not going to do it. Did you have to do that this week? I think most of you say, yes, we have. Whether it be a thought, or whether it be an action, or whether it be a combination of both. Triggers start in the mind. And you may say, well, what about money? Money's not a trigger. The love of money is a trigger that leads to sin. Do we look like Joseph and we try to find the triggers, but when things are too hot, we flee? We flee from our sin so that we can become more like Jesus Christ. We have to have that. So we're talking about mind control. Mind control. So I wanted to give you that story since most of us know Joseph. Because what an example. If a 70, 18-year-old kid, as I would call him, you name him 60, whatever I am, 66 I can call a 20 kid. If he can do it back then, at that age, how do you think he was later? He had character. He had character. So I asked the question, did you flee sin in the last 7 days? And if you did, was it because of what you were eating? Could that be? I sometimes needed a reminder. I think it's good. Was 7 days enough? Probably not. But I'm not telling Mary, oh, I loved it so much, let's do it 7 more days. Let's eat matzo 7 more days. So let's go and look at what the Bible says about fleeing. And if we're really good fleers, I hope you're great fleers, because your potential is unlimited. Let's go to 2 Timothy, if you will join me there. 2 Timothy 2. 2 Timothy 2 and verse 22. He's telling Timothy, who's young at that time, a young minister, and he tells him, flee youthful lusts, because that's where it develops. You develop a lot of your lusts when you're younger. Things you've never tried. Oh, this sounds exciting, you know. It says, flee youthful lust, but pursue righteousness, faith, love, peace, with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. So he says, flee, but pursue. So we're fleeing this side, but we should be pursuing the other. In theology world, they call it replacement theology, where we reference that the church now in the New Testament replaced Israel of old. And now it's called Church of God. Because they rejected God. And I can guarantee you, if the Church of God rejects God's teaching, he will reject them too. But he hasn't. So we're talking about replacement theology. So in a way, this is talking about replacing the lust with some pure thoughts. Because it is amazing how just your mind, you can have your mind on something and then something can change your mind and then you're not even, why did I even go there? We replaced this week, the last 7 days, something that God said was important. Because he wanted a trigger. He wanted the right trigger. So his part of replacement theology is to take out the leavened bread and replace it with unleavened bread. And that then we would start doing what? Thinking more like Christ. Amazing. As a matter of fact, one translation says to flee, but chase. Chase after what is pure. This is what he's wanted us to do for the last 7 days. Why? It's good training exercise. It's good to train our minds. And we're reminded, why it's good training is we like to eat. And he knows that. Matter of fact, most of us eat 3 meals a day. Most people eat, everybody here 3 meals a day? 3 meals? No. Andre goes, I don't dare. That's how he stays so slim, I guess. But think on that. Because it wasn't just, oh, why do we have to eat this bread? There's a purpose being worked out with God. And it's all about us becoming more like Christ. It is that simple. So go with me to first. What did he say? Flee youthful lust. Well, what if you don't have youthful lust? Then we need to go to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 18. Can't say this isn't youthful lust, but he says to do what? He tells the church at Corinth, flee. Flee sexual immorality. Sexual immorality. Every sin that a man does is outside the body. You go murder somebody, you go steal from somebody, you lie to somebody, but it says, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. And he's not just talking about STDs. That's one thing. But he's talking about the reason he made sexual union between a husband and a wife. It bonds you. It bonds you to them. And when you take that outside of marriage, you break that bond. And that bond affects your mind. And it definitely does. 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 18. Think about some of the things how do we flee sexual immorality? Well, there's places we need to not go. If that is a problem for you, you probably don't need to be out on the beach. Right? But when you're young, it's like, party! Matter of fact, this Miami and Fort Lauderdale, they're known for spring break, where you can come and dress barely there. And you can go and have a fun time and add alcohol and fulfill your lust. And especially sexual immorality. Is it a trigger? If it is, got a man sitting here, won't call his name, said he didn't go to the beach. Never goes to the beach. Because he didn't want to be tempted. He wants to keep his focus on his wife. Which is great. Why are you guys all looking back there? I see the women looking back. There's this guy. It's exactly why I didn't say his name. I wanted to see what you would do. But think about it. Look at our TV and our movies. It's so much laced with sexual immorality. How about YouTube videos? I watch YouTube because I watch sermons and I do this kind of stuff, but what pops up in your thread? Anything to entice these eyes and to get you, so I need to turn off, scroll down quickly. Because it will after a while. Your mind becomes tempered to this is okay. For girls to dress immodestly, to you see everything but about 6 square inches of their body. That's okay, because you can put that on TV. They can put that in movies. But what about us? Where's the trigger? I'm not just saying that about girls either. Men that do the same thing. So it is something that we have to do. And what got me is music videos, which I don't see many, but today's music, it's all about that. You know, some beautifully clad women, barely clad women, laying over this big fancy $200,000, $400,000 car. And then for some reason money comes flying out. And I've just scrolled through that and it's, oh yeah, I want to be that. And I was thinking, if I was an 18-year-old guy, that's what I'd be looking at. But it's a temptation that's there. Because it's about lust. They forget about what's involved in a truly great marriage. And it's about love, not lust. Let's go over to. So we knew to flee sexual immorality, which is exactly what Joseph did, didn't he? He did. So let's go over to 1 Corinthians 10. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 14. 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 14. Therefore, my beloved, flee. Flee what? From idolatry. So here's another trigger. Let's go. What we need to flee. Well, you may say, what are you talking about? I don't have a carved wooden image sitting inside my house. Is that all there is? No. What are American idols? Football. Man confessed. But here, this is promoted. It's been on for how many years? I don't know, a lot of years. And they promote that you can have American Idol. And you can be America's, what's that little guy say? America's newest idol. This is our society. How are we not affected by it? Then you have, besides entertainment, you have sports. Oh, yes. And you've got these guys. This guy right here. This guy here. This guy here. And they have no problem being idols. Matter of fact, they like it, and they became very rich by being an idol. So what about it? Are there other idols? Because he said, flee from idolatry. Idolatry is when you make anything more important than God. I had my own company. When I had my company, for too many years, God was here. And my business was here. What are they today? Can we look at that? Because where do we spend most of our time? What do we spend our time on? Let me get my phone so I can look at my phone. When I just traveled through the airport this past week, I just looked, because I was working on this sermon, and I looked at everybody. 90% of the people were on their phone. Not that, they may have been important messages. It might have been life and death. It could have been this, but most of them had some entertainment. When I would look over at the screen, and I know they looked at me like, "What's wrong with you?" But there was entertainment. It was stuff. So when does this become an idol? Don't we need to look at that too? Because he was talking to the people in Corinth that had all kinds of idols around that they would worship in. You think Paul could find some idols here in America? Why, he could probably give 2 years of sermons. Didn't know this happened. Didn't know you had this. What is it about? Am I down on it? No, it's about us becoming more like Christ. The time, being able to flee idolatry, flee sin. So let's go over to 1 Timothy. As he tells Timothy again, but 1 Timothy 6. Wait a minute. Where was I? 1 Corinthians. No, go back to 1 Corinthians 10. I got to do this because found it so interesting, because the word flee there is fugo, as it in most of the time, which runs in haste, because Corinth was known at that time in the world as Las Vegas is today. New Orleans. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So you go there and nobody knows what you did. Well, that's what Corinth was. People went to party. It was like a big, big place. As a matter of fact, the Enduring World Bible Commentary said this with this verse. Said it means to act like a Corinthian. It was a phrase that was used. What was that song? Walk like an Egyptian. Well, this was act like a Corinthian. What does that mean? It tells us to act like a Corinthian means loose living, especially sexually immoral acts. And it meant to practice fornication. I'm going to go be a Corinthian next week. So it was in Paul's time. Matter of fact, you could actually go to the temple and they would ring a bell every time you went into a temple prostitute, male or female. And you could hear it. They'd be in services and they could hear they were ringing the bell because more people had gone to practice their religion. Okay, go with me. I just need to touch on that. Let's go to 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy 6, verse 11. He says, "But you, old man," even though he's a young guy, "but you, O man of God, flee from these things." Another fugo. Fugo these things and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, and gentleness. 6 things. Flee this, go after this. He's telling us that today through his writings. So, flee these things. What things? What things? Let's go back to verse 8. 3 verses earlier. Verse 8. So 1 Timothy 6 and verse 8. "And having food and clothing, with these things you shall be content." I wish all of us could be, but most of us will not be. My car is getting old. People have seen me in this dress, I don't know how many times. Well, not me, but I'm just saying. Don't want to start a rumor. I'm a confident heterosexual. "Having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts." Why? Because I got the money. Tiger Woods, one of the greatest golfers ever played, great athlete. What happened to his marriage? How many women were there he had on a chain at one time while he was married? How many? 50? 15. 18. 18. Don't want to make a joke, but he had to be an athlete. But think about it. This is why could he do it? He was famous. How did he do it? He had all kinds of money, didn't he? And so what happens when you have too much money? And then people will cover for you. Won't they? And then I knew a guy that, how much time? Oh, I don't have much time. I can't tell that story. I knew a guy who made a whole lot of money. He got in a new career. He made a whole lot of money. And he's a friend of mine. He was. And grew up in the church. But he left the church. And got this great job. And made high 6 figures. One time. And he said, he was a good athlete. Kept himself in shape. But he said after we closed this one deal, his boss calls him in the office and says, "We got to celebrate." And lays out cocaine. Because that's how he celebrated cocaine. And he said, "I just did it. Didn't want to do it, but I just did it." And he said, "It was the greatest high I've ever had in my life." And he said, "I knew that if I ever did it again, I'd never stop." But he had money. He'd have never done it if it wasn't for money. You just wouldn't do that. So this is what Paul's telling us. I know a guy who said that he had a $1,000 bottle of tequila. I didn't know they made tequila. I don't drink tequila, but they make, is it 20,000? Man, how did she know that? I'm sorry, you were at a store, but yeah, I didn't realize they had. No, isn't that crazy? You have too much money and not enough sense, or you whatever to do things like that. But look, I got to finish this. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and snare into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is not the root. A root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith, happened there, in their greediness, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. He's saying it can happen. It can happen. Right. James 4, verse 7. Oh, this is a good fugo. Right? This is a great fugo because it says, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will do what? Fugo. Flee from you. That's the kind of fleeing we want. So that's giving us an antidote for the problem. Submit to God first, and then he will flee from you, and you're not going to have a lot of the temptations. Have you fled spiritual danger lately? If you haven't, you probably will. You're probably going to need to. Are you a fleer? You need to be. We need to be. We need to flee because there are certain sins we can't overcome, and I hope you learned that this week. There are certain things we cannot do by ourselves. And we need God's help. And so with those, we better flee. Don't put ourselves in that position. 7 days of fleeing sin is what we've just gone through. Enough time? Is there enough time there in the last, 6.5 days now, for fleeing sin to become a habit? Is it a habit? Triggers. Do we pick them up? I think it's John Stott who actually says, sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, and you reap a character. This is what God wants us to be. Holy and righteous character. Was flatbread for you a good trainer for the last 6.5 days? Only you can answer that, except for God. He knows whether you actually used it to or whether you looked at it and chewed it. That tasteless matzo, and thought what it was supposed to bring to your mind. Define your triggers. That's what God wants you to do. Are you visual? Better know your triggers. So you can fugo sin. Flee it. Flee it. Don't massage it. Don't play with it. Flee it. God's people need to be fleers. I hope that you will be. Because does sin scare you? It should. Romans 6:23. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. Okay, because if we continue, because we know, and we know, and if you know, and you still do it, and it becomes a pattern, becomes a habit, you will get a first-class ticket to the lake of fire, according to this book. So we have to make sure. Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 12, verse 13. Says, find satisfaction in your toil, as one translation says. It's a gift from God. And he said there's nothing better than to enjoy what you do. It's your purpose. So your mind's not just, I wish I did this. And if you really hate what you do for 8 to 10 hours a day, good, go do something else. We live in a country where you can. But it's for your preservation. Because if a person's miserable, what they do for a living, and you hate it, you're going to be used. You're going to be used. You're going to be used by Satan. And he's going to release triggers. And you're going to want to be happy somewhere else. You're going to find happiness. You're going to find joy in somewhere where you don't need to. It's that big of a deal. But as he said, learn to be content. Maybe you don't have the best job in the world. Okay. That's not that doesn't define you as a person. Because we understand Psalm 68 verse 20 says we have a God of salvation. Right? He's a God of salvation. That's what he's about. He's about our salvation. He wants you to have salvation. He wants you to have eternal life. He wants the entire world to have it. It's just so important to him right now that you're the first fruits, as we're about to find out in 7 weeks, and how important that is to him. So I want you to think about the last hours of these days of unleavened bread, because it's going to happen again next year, either with or without you. And if it's without you, it's because you're no longer above ground, or you've left the truth. And you didn't learn the lesson about fleeing. So, I'll leave you with these words. You know them. Think on them. Because I say, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall let you flee. See you back here next week.